Thank you for clicking on the podcast. My name is Brian, and today we're going to talk through some questions that were submitted by people on the back end of the photo, video, marketing, that sort of a world. If you would like to learn more about that or my thoughts on these questions, stick around. This is the Swino Creative Podcast. I'll be your host, professional photographer and video content creator, Brian Swino. In this podcast, we will discuss all parts of business, marketing, mindset, creativity, and self-improvement. Sometimes with the help of a special guest to provide some incredible outside perspective. The first question is someone who commented, I saw a video of yours a while ago that dissed Nikon. Could you explain why? I use Nikon D850 for all of my work. So in that regard, I have no issue with any sort of camera company. Every single camera company makes really, really great cameras these days. And that's something you'll hear me say a lot is like, if you can't make good stuff with cameras that have been released within like the last 5 years, then the problem is probably you or your lack of knowledge in whatever area you're trying to take photos of. I have my personal preference, which is Sony, which is what I've used the whole entire time I've done photo and video stuff. The video you're talking about, I was probably just kind of lightly poking fun at the fact that Nikon is like the ugly stepchild almost of the camera brands, but they make really, really good stuff too. I know one of my fellow photographers here in town, David Krischer, he uses exclusively Nikon stuff. His stuff is really great. The quality is there for photo anyway. Now I do feel like Canon and Sony, and especially Sony, even from Canon, is pulling away from the pack a little bit when it comes to not only like portability of the cameras and packing so much quality in such a small package and making it as affordable as possible to get really, really professional looking things. I feel like Sony has went that direction and they almost have too many options to choose from. If there's one gripe that I would have from Sony, what you're describing was probably me just poking fun at, in the photography world, Nikon is just like almost like the little weird stepchild of the camera brands. So I actually have no issue with Nikon. They make great stuff. I've never personally used it, but I have seen a lot of other photographers that use it and they do great stuff. So I've seen nothing but awesome stuff. Here's another question that someone sent in. What are the essential camera settings I need to know before shooting a photo or video? Well, that totally depends on what you're shooting and how you're wanting to shoot it. And this is where everything gets subjective with photography or video stuff. There are a couple like rules of thumb essentially, but it would take the whole entire rest of the podcast to answer that question in full. So I'll just say, know with photography, know what kind of lighting you're working with, nailing your white balance and all of that stuff in camera is going to save you a lot of editing time on the back end. The most essential camera settings that I could tell you in this short little thing doesn't even have to do with camera settings. It has to do more with light and learning how light affects an image and how to set your camera settings for the light that you're shooting in. That is the biggest thing I could possibly tell you, and that has helped me out tremendously. There's a lot of factors that go into shooting photo and video before camera settings even become a thing. Another question that was sent in was, what is the difference between shooting in manual mode and automatic mode, and which is better? The biggest thing I can say is whenever you're first starting out, you're probably going to get your camera, you're going to turn it on, you're going to be all excited, and you're going to flip it on just regular automatic mode, and you're just going to let the photos happen as they happen. That's totally fine, totally fine to do that. But learning what settings are what and which settings affect other settings, that is the difference between automatic and manual mode. When you're in automatic, your camera is choosing what it thinks the final image would look best as and adjusting everything for those settings. How much light is coming in, it will adjust the exposure down. So you have very limited control over the final outcome with automatic settings. If you know how aperture, shutter speed, and ISO affect your exposure, and if you know how the f-stop on your lens determines the depth of field that you get out of your image, then you can choose how your image looks. You can have control over every single aspect of your photo so that you can get the things that are in your head actually out into the world. So I'm a huge proponent of shooting in manual, learning how each setting affects the other settings, and then you get to choose what your final image looks like versus letting your camera decide that for you. Another question that was sent in is, how can I create a consistent look and feel across my photos or videos? This is a great question because you're not ever going to have control over everything. One thing you can do is like take photography. Whenever you first get started in photography, and even for your whole photography career, you're going to be shooting in settings that are not ever the same. You're not always going to be shooting in the same exact location at the same time of day with the same exact weather outside. So you need to learn how to control those as much as possible. And whenever you take your photos and then into your editing program, that's where you can take those colors and kind of tweak them, and you can make a consistent look of your own and get that pretty consistent across the board, even in factoring different types of weather, different lighting conditions, different tints of stuff. This is where spending that time to really know how the light affects the subject. If you're shooting in harsh light outside, how to position them to make it easier on yourself later, how to set your camera's white balance. All of those things are going to affect your final outcome whenever you go into this. So, and with videos, it's even more important to have all that stuff nailed to be able to then change those colors in post to create the look that you actually want to go for. What a lot of people do, honestly, is buy presets from established creators who they know, who they like, they trust them, they like the look of their images, and a lot of people sell those presets online. You can go that route, or you can go the route of making your own presets. But one thing that I did, and this is something you could apply as well, is whenever you do that, whenever you buy someone's preset, put it on an image. Those presets are made for their lighting conditions, for their camera settings, all of that stuff. So just slapping a random person's preset on your work is not going to get you exactly where you want to go, probably. There are people who make really, really great presets, and some of them just, it doesn't work with the same camera settings, the same lighting situation, all of that stuff, because all of that stuff affects how the image looks. If I found a preset that I really liked, I would apply it to my photos, and even if it made the photo look completely terrible, then I would take that terrible photo with that preset, make that terrible looking thing into something that was good. Because if you can learn how to make something that's bad look good, then whenever you get to the point of having your photography stuff look good or great to start with, then you can take that up to really, really good. So I kind of reverse engineered what the preset was doing to my images, and some things I did like, some things I didn't like, and paying attention to those settings that it changed in your editor, like on Lightroom, just paying attention to what that does to your image and which settings you like, which settings you don't like, then that will help you then take that knowledge and create your own, knowing which things you like to see, which things you don't like to see, which colors you like to see a little bit more of. Like, it's one thing that I do in almost every one of my things is kind of mute the green color, which means like kind of taking the saturation down on the greens and kind of shifting the luminance, which is how bright the greens are, a little bit down as well. So it kind of takes those greens that sometimes, especially in the midday, they can look like nuclear, which is like neon almost. They can look real overbearing. And so I take just the saturation down a little bit and then take the luminance down a little bit, and it just makes a little bit more depth and a little bit more weight to the green color. That's one of the things that I really like in my images, and the way that I shoot and the way that I set up the shots. I like that sort of thing. For a long time, I didn't like the color green, and a lot of photographers have the problem of, I don't know if they don't know how to correct that correctly, or if they just really like the look of it, but some photographers just pretend that the color green doesn't exist, and every single shot they take with anything green in it, they will shift that hue of green over to orange, and it just looks like you ran an Oompa Loompa filter all over everything and just makes everything completely orange and washed out, like green doesn't exist in the real world. So I'm not a real big fan of that. There's some really great photographers who do that, but in my opinion, it's taken a little bit overboard sometimes where everything is orange, and I'm just not a huge fan of that. I go for more of a naturalistic sort of look and then just enhance it a little bit. That's what I aim to do with my stuff. And that's what I would encourage you to find as well. Find your voice, find those little things in the way that you shoot and the way that you can edit the photo to make your sort of look that you love, that you're comfortable with, that your clients are hitting you up because they really like your work. Find that look. And it takes several years whenever you're very first getting started. It takes several years to get that nailed down. You're going to buy presets. You're going to slap this thing on some stuff. You're going to think it looks really great, but in reality, it's going to look really terrible. That happens for everybody. Everyone goes through that phase. They go through the phase of shooting every random thing they can possibly see, different mailboxes or different pieces of trash on the ground, like random stuff like that. Everybody goes through that phase of the beginner photography things. But knowing when you've got to the point of where you need to make your own look and you need to kind of take that step out of the nest and start flapping your own wings, that's a really beneficial thing to know and be self-aware of when you're getting into this or any other field in life for that matter. Another question that was submitted is, what is the importance of lighting in photography and videography? Well, lighting is the single most important thing when it comes to anything camera related. What you are doing with a camera is capturing light. That is what this is. So the importance of light is astronomical. You can't do what you want to do with no light. If every room you walk into is pitch black, your camera is just going to get a pitch black photo. That's where learning all the stuff on the back end of how different lighting affects different things, how people perceive different forms of lighting or harsh light. What feeling does that give the photo versus nice soft light like this? Knowing how to light something or how to adapt to different sorts of lighting is the number one thing that I could possibly tell you to do to up your level of production on what you can do on the photo and video side. There is nothing more important than light. There's nothing more important than your knowledge of how to shape light and use that to your advantage. So very, very, very important. Another question that was asked is, how can I use composition and framing to create visually compelling images and videos? For composition, there's a thing called the rule of thirds, which is the way that I am on your screen right now. I am center framed, it's called. So there's 1/3 of the frame right here, from right here to right here. There's 1/3 of the frame from here all the way to here. And I'm in this middle third. I like this style a lot. I shoot a lot of this sort of style in my photography as well, and my other stuff. Whenever you put someone in the center of the frame, they almost command the frame. It gives them importance in the frame, because if something's happening right back here, it's not going to matter because this camera is focused on me. I'm in the center. This is what's happening. You can take that and apply that same thing to your work. And that's what I do a lot. A lot of people also like to do the rule of thirds, which is where you divide the frame this way into 3 sections, and then you can divide the frame this way into thirds. So there would be a line right here going straight across. There would be a line right here going straight across. My eyes right now are on this third right here, where these 2 lines and these 2 lines meet. I'm right here. That's called your eye line. So I want to position myself to where there's not a whole ton of space above my head, but there's not a whole ton of space below me either. That's how I like to frame this sort of like talking head sort of thing. If you want to do the rule of thirds in a different way, which is where you would position something here, like if I was to scoot over this way, like right here, then I would be on where this line and this line converge is where I am. And usually you want to do that whenever you have the person looking off this way, or if you have some sort of visual interest on this side of the frame and you want to fill the frame up with something else, that's whenever that comes in handy. Or if you have leading lines, like if you shoot a photo with someone with like railing or something that's kind of leading all in to them, and you want that to be more of the frame on this side and then pointing your eye in the direction of the person that's on this third, then that's another way to do that. There's a whole bunch of different ways to frame stuff and how that affects the final image and how that affects how people perceive the image. Also, there's an absolute ton. Again, that could be a whole podcast and everything in itself. I'll make some YouTube videos covering some of this stuff more in depth as single things also. So stay tuned for that if you want to learn more on that. The next question that was asked is, what are some common mistakes to avoid when shooting photos? My idea of this answer might be a little bit different than some other people, but my number one thing with doing anything service-based is, whether that's photos, whether that's videos, whether that's selling someone something, if someone is purchasing a service from you, they need to get the best you. If you're a photographer and you're charging this amount for your service, then people need to get this amount of you and your attention and your expertise. And they don't need you completely distracted and running around and getting totally stressed out about everything and doing that whole thing. Like, provide people with a great service, great images, great time, great just friendship, and they will always love whatever you give them. So that would be the number one mistake, in my opinion, of shooting photos, is not delivering a great experience while getting great images. But for photos specifically, some common mistakes are having like clashing things within a photo. Like if I was to position myself over here on this third, like if my eye was over here, like we were just talking about in that last example, if I'm over here in this third like this, and I was to take a photo of me right here, do you see how the frame right now feels unbalanced? I'm on this whole side. I'm just hanging out over here, and there's just a whole big empty gap right here. That is something that just makes your image, if this was a photo, if I was to just smile, it just wouldn't make for a great photo. Whether I look good in the photo, whether the lighting's great or not, just that one little thing of shifting me over here, it just doesn't look that great. It just feels off balance. So little things like that are also some mistakes that I see of people not like balancing their image. You don't have to shoot everything with people directly in the middle of the frame, but you have to know how different things affect other things. Like, that's a lot of what photography and video is solving problems whenever things come up. If there's harsh light outside, what are you doing to solve that? Are you going to the shade to shoot? Are you positioning the sun to be behind the person and sort of at a 45-degree angle behind the person? Then the sun will give you an edge light, and you can either use a reflector or use a flash or something else to brighten up that person's face. And all of that, that's just one example of a lot of different things you can do, but having that knowledge ahead of time going into that shoot and knowing how to solve those problems on the fly. Whenever you book an hour session with someone and you go outside and it's not an overcast day where you can put a person in any direction and it looks great. If you have harsh light outside, that's one of the hardest things to shoot, especially whenever you're beginning and you don't know exactly how to do it. And the sunlight is hitting someone's face and you have a big old blast of light on this side, and then this side of their face falls completely dark. Knowing how to combat these situations is something you need to know ahead of time. And I would suggest going out on those days and figuring out that stuff. There's a bunch of YouTube videos. There'll be more YouTube videos on my channel soon, but you can learn anything. You can learn anything off of YouTube these days. And I would love to be the person to teach you. If I can help you out with anything, let me know, and I will make these videos like with that in mind of helping people. That's exactly what I want to do with what I'm doing. But knowing the framing, knowing how to deal with different sorts of lighting conditions, knowing what you're wanting to do with the image. Like, have you ever seen in movies? Here's a different example. Have you ever seen in movies where you have a subject in the movie who is maybe feeling trapped? Like maybe it's like a teenager who's feel trapped by their parents, or maybe having like an abusive father, that sort of a situation in a movie. They're probably going to frame that person. You know how I was saying where I was on this side of the frame and it felt a little unbalanced? They're going to intentionally do that sort of stuff in that movie, if you pay attention to that. So they will probably shoot a lot wider angle stuff. It makes the person seem small in the frame, which kind of subconsciously gives you that idea of they feel small and insignificant. And if they feel like trapped in that situation, a lot of times, I'm going to try to do it here. My camera will keep focus on my eye, where they'll be on this side of the frame, or they'll be close to the edge of the frame, but looking away. And they'll be sort of like this sort of a style of look, to where the frame is completely unbalanced, but it is intentionally unbalanced to make that sort of feel like this person is trapped. There's a wall right here in front of their face. Rather than looking into the frame, they're looking out of the frame. And this sort of a look, when used correctly in a movie or things like that, where you're going for that feeling, you're going to make the person feel small in a bigger space. You're going for making them feel trapped, like they're up against the edge of the frame. That stuff has to be intentional, though. If you just do that, if I was to just sit here and do this whole podcast like this, you guys would think I was crazier than I actually am. Because it gives you an uneasy feeling whenever you see stuff like this. Because in movies and stuff like that you've watched, whether you pay attention to it or not, that's what it does. And it triggers your brain to know that's what it is. You don't have to subconsciously, or you don't have to consciously think about stuff like that. Your brain just does it for you. And that's what part of the art of making photos, making video stuff. Another thing about that is like being intentional with how you shoot things. Like this right here. I sat down here, I positioned my camera to where you guys are at my eye line height. The camera is right here, straight across from my face. I want you to watch this, and I want you to feel like you are sitting down with me. If we were eating dinner or something, or if we were, having a meeting or doing whatever, this is the sort of look that would provide. So we're equals right here. I want you to feel like you're welcome. I don't want you to feel like I'm super up here and I'm looking down at you. So if I put this camera down and had it looking up at me, it would make me feel more powerful. It would make me look like you're looking up at me. I must be something great. Look at superhero movies. A lot of their shots are low to the ground, looking up at the superhero because they are larger than life. Or if I wanted to do the opposite of where I would raise this camera and then I would be looking up at the camera. It gives you that sort of adult versus little kid sort of vibe where you guys would be looking down on me, and it makes me less important in the frame, even if I'm the only thing in the frame. It just conveys that in your brain. So I'm a huge nerd when it comes to psychology and all of the things, figuring out how people do certain things, why people feel certain ways, and that just lends itself so well to photography and video stuff and motion and stopping action or freezing action or having motion blur into things, and how all of that stuff ties in is stuff that just like, that is my brain type, is to know that stuff and to figure that stuff out. If I don't know something, I will figure it out. That's the sort of people that will succeed with photography and video stuff, because even if I wasn't doing this for a living, if I was just picking up a camera and going out and trying to shoot stuff and make it look cool or do whatever, this is what I would be doing. I love doing this, and I love all the things that make it what it is. I kind of went off on a tirade there. I don't even remember what the actual question was, but hopefully I answered it somewhere in there. And I'll move on to the next question. We got a couple more here. Here's another one that someone asked. How can I stay up to date with the latest photography and videography trends and techniques? Here's another hot take, I guess. You shouldn't. You shouldn't know all of the, or maybe I shouldn't say you shouldn't. You shouldn't want to emulate every new trend that you see popping up. You shouldn't want to follow every new little thing that how someone colors their image, or how someone does this, or how someone does that. You don't need to do that. You need to be you. There's only one of you and one of your eyes and all of that. Everyone sees things differently. The way you see an image versus the way I see an image would be totally different. If we both had cameras in our hand, same camera, same lens, same light, same subject, there would be two different images that come out of that. This is something I'm going to be exploring here in YouTube videos coming up. I'm going to get a couple different photographers and have the same subject in the same location within a couple minutes of each other. So you got pretty much the same exact light to work with. And I'm going to see how different each of those 4 images are. And then also different variation of that. Take the same exact image from each of the photographers and have each of the photographers edit their own and the other people's images, and see how just with the same exact baseline raw photo, how the different 4 ways of editing it make it totally, totally different. These are things that I'm fascinated about, and I really want to explore this in YouTube and make videos about this and show this off, because this is the thing that sets you apart, is your eye and the way that you would shoot something, and what focal length you like best, what depth of field you like best, what lighting you like best, how you position your subjects or have them stand in a photo or sit in a photo, or all of the things. Everything affects everything. All of that to say, you shouldn't want to hop on all of the newest trends. Maybe you should stay up to date and know what people are doing. But if you're just trying to chase after every trendy thing that pops up in photography, videography, or just in life, then you're probably going to be left behind pretty quickly, because no one wants to see that. If a new trend pops up in photography and everybody starts doing it, that's what makes it get old really fast. You know the song Flowers by Miley Cyrus? Whenever that first came out, it was the best song, and it was everywhere. Every single time I open TikTok or open any sort of thing, here's this Flowers song playing by her. But guess what? It has a shelf life of about a week or 2, maybe a little longer, before it's just beating a dead horse, and it just loses all of its goodness because everyone is using it. Everyone is doing it. This is the same sort of stuff that applies to photography. If you do the same exact thing as everybody else is doing, you aren't being you. You're not using your eye for photography. You're not using your brain to craft this image. You're just trying to follow along with what everybody else is doing. And if you're trying to copy someone else, you're not ever going to be as good as them at being them. So you're always going to be less good than who you're trying to copy. I don't know about you, but I want to be the best that I can be, not be the second best of what someone else can be. That's my sort of rant on photography trends and all of that stuff. I'm not saying you can't take something that someone is doing and apply some principles of what they're doing to your stuff. That's how all of us develop our skills. You see something that someone's doing that you might like that little aspect of, instead of ripping it off completely, you take that element, like the way that I light stuff, or the way that this is framed out, or what I just talked about in this podcast of framing subjects and doing different stuff like that. That might have opened your eyes to something that then you can take that and apply that to your next project, or if it fits, but make sure it fits. There needs to be a reason behind it. If you just take a random photo to take a random photo, it's just going to be a random photo. If you want to do more things that matter and things that actually have some depth and weight to them, then you have to actually make that stuff happen, or actually put yourself in the position to capitalize on photography in that scenario. And the same things apply to video when it comes to all of this. It's really easy in this day and age to just see something that someone's doing and copy it. There's a YouTube channel called Colin and Samir, and they just made a video about this. I just watched it yesterday, about the plagiarism that is just rampant all over the internet these days, of someone doing something and then a million other people following them right behind them and doing the exact same thing, or someone making a YouTube video and people stealing their exact script, the exact frames that they did, and just recreating that same exact video, plagiarizing the whole entire thing. At what point does being someone else and just straight up ripping someone off become like punishable? That's sort of the question that they posed in this YouTube video. It was really, really informative and really kind of eye-opening to a lot of different things of like whenever we first start out with cameras, like you look up to certain people. You might have been inspired by something, but you're trying to rip it off. In my opinion, you shouldn't do that. But some people try really, really hard to do that, to rip people off. Is they see someone having success at something and they just want that success, and they'll do any means possible to have that success that they think that person might have, even if that includes setting aside their morals, and instead of having some integrity about it, they just rip it off. You know, you could see some success like that, especially this day and age where it seems like everyone's just ripping everybody off for no apparent reason, and you get rewarded with it with views and likes and all this other stuff. But in my opinion, I want to make what I like. I want to shoot those photos that I've always had this idea of doing that with the smoke and the lights and the drama and all that stuff. That is what I like. That is what was in my head. There is some value in not always succeeding the first time in what you do, because then you can learn, you can figure out what didn't work, and then it gives you a greater input for what might work the next time. Again, I go off the rails on all of the answers, but don't try to hop on all the trends. Don't try to do that. Be your own person, be your own voice. That's just with anything with life, not even just photography and video. Just be your own person. You will go way, way farther, probably way faster, if you just are you, because there's only one you. Your voice needs to be your voice. Your personality needs to be your personality. All right, that's going to wrap up the podcast. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for leaving these comments and sending the messages to me. I appreciate it. Hopefully these helped you out a little bit. Hopefully it answered some of these questions at least, and maybe some other ones that I rambled on about. But if there's one thing I can leave you with, it is to seek progression, not perfection, in what you're doing. Thank you guys for listening or watching on YouTube. Check out some of the previous episodes if you haven't, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.